PTF and Vanessa Ryle here to go over all of the European contenders at this year's Breeders' Cup. Vanessa, give us the overview of the team as a whole.
Overview of the team as a whole, I would say I personally viewing it not as strong as previous years. That's my gut instinct, having looked obviously at the pre-entries, which is what we've got at this stage. What we're going to do here is skim through pretty much every horse that's running in terms of coming over from Europe. And we will be getting into so much more detail on these horses in the coming weeks, but we'll just give viewers and listeners, I think, a skim over of the sort of horses that are coming over and their relative chances. But as a whole, strong big contingent from O'Brien, as you'd expect. Lesser contingent from Appleby, as we feared, due to the year that he's had. That's Charlie Appleby. And then we've got a couple of Breeders' Cup first-timers, which will add a good bit of sort of media interest with the likes of Mick Appleby and Adam West with a runner apiece, and obviously their first time at a Breeders' Cup. So there's some interest there. But is it the deepest, strongest team we've ever brought over? I wouldn't say so.
How about in terms of the tail of the tape? Any specifics on the numbers?
In terms of the numbers, I think we're around the 40 marker for the European contingent. 40 individual horses coming over from Europe. So that's France, Ireland, and England, from roughly 15, 16 different trainers. And when you're looking at the likes of Aidan, for example, he has, I think, about 15, 16 entries, individual horses entered. These are rough numbers because obviously we have got the entries through at this stage, but we're not entirely sure what, if everything is going to run from those sort of yards. But then you've got the likes of Jesse Harrington, Ado McGuinness, Adrian Murray, couple from France, Archie Watson and Rafe Beckett. They've all got entries with one or two horses apiece. So interest across the board. Just fear it's not our strongest ever team.
The exception to that might be the turf. We'll get to that and all of these races in just a second. Just want to let people know there's going to be so much more content on the In the Money Media YouTube channel. Leave us a comment and let us know which European runners you're the most excited to see. You can also get more in terms of podcast content over at inthemoneypodcast.com or wherever you get your shows. And we'll also be doing stuff for our pals at theraces.com. We'll start with the turf sprint and the runner who's at the top of the market right now. What can you tell us about Big Evs?
Well, Big Evs is, as the aforementioned Mick Appleby's first ever Breeders' Cup runner. Mick Appleby is no relation to Charlie Appleby, if anybody out there is wondering. Just bear that in mind. And this horse has been a crack 2-year-old for him. And you're a typical, very fast 5 furlong specialist, essentially. He's 3 from 5. He bolted up in the Flying Childers at Doncaster over 5 furlongs that day. Watch it back. I mean, he just wins the race at the start and then puts the pressure on throughout, and nothing ever looked like catching him. It was a phenomenal performance. That was on soft ground. He has disappointed against his elders at York, but he bolted up in the Molecombe at Goodwood, and he's won at Royal Ascot as well. He beat Johannes Bramus that day, who's got an entry at the Breeders' Cup as well. This horse, Big Evs, he's just an out-and-out 5 furlong specialist. They've brought a starting bell back from America to try and get him used to that, but he's already an electric starter. And Mick Appleby is an extraordinary trainer. He's done it the hard way with basically horses of a pretty low level that he's managed to get to winning at higher levels. But this horse in Big Evs was a crack 2-year-old from the start. And will he cope with Santa Anita? I think he will.
Yeah, never been around a bend. I mean, what's your gut about that? Anything in the action or anything that suggests that that will be agreeable to him in terms of the USA conditions?
I don't think it'll be in any way an issue for him. I don't envisage it being an issue for him. I think they've taken him, and when we talk about him later, the older sprinter Brad Sell as well, Archie Watson's runner in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. I'm sure I heard somewhere that they're not trained by the same people, by the way, but just in terms of sprinters coming over, there was talk about Big Ev's going for a gallop at a track so that he could gallop round a bend. And I know that they've done that with Brad Sell. So no stone will have been left unturned with these European horses coming over for these sprints. The bell, the taking them to gallop at a track round a bend, all of that stuff will have been taken into consideration.
It's interesting because as much success as the European contingent has always had, I feel like the training methods as time goes on just get better and better, just different things happening, getting in earlier, more little tricks and quite literally bells and whistles to get the team even stronger. It's a scary thought for American turf horses trying to compete, though I do think sprints are certainly one of the areas where they have that opportunity to compete. So in terms of form figures, Big Ev's is, I think, far and away the best of the ones coming over. In terms of speed figures, and we'll have a whole thing about these Euros and what speed figures we expect them to run based on their times in the European races. We'll have that behind the paywall. InTheMoneyPodcast.com/plus team, including Stephen Bonnick and Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today. We'll be putting that together. But I thought it was interesting in this race, particularly just looking at some of their early work, that speed figure-wise, Big Ev's doesn't have that much in hand over the likes of Pearls and Rubies or Cherry Blossom. So I was curious to know, how do you think the rest, maybe we'll rattle through quickly in the interest of time, but the rest of the European turf juvenile turf sprint contenders, how do they compare, do you think? Would you give them a chance?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't discount them. Obviously, we've seen Aidan O'Brien do what he's done before over there with horses that we have discounted in certain races, and then he's got the best out of them for the Breeders' Cup. Cherry Blossom and Pearls and Rubies, both trained by Aidan. Cherry Blossom has just the one win to her name. She won a Curragh Maiden. She's finished fourth in the Cheveley Park of late. That was over the 6 furlongs behind Porta Fortuna, who's stepping up in trip. We'll talk about her later. Cherry Blossom's basically consistent, but stepping down to 5 furlongs is the question mark with her. And as for Pearls and Rubies, again, a bit of a trip question mark. She hasn't won since her debut win in June. She's had 5 runs since, and they've all been over further than this, and that includes running Porta Fortuna in second place in that Cheveley Park. Now she'll be dropping back down to the 5 again. She's back on good ground, Pearls and Rubies, which will definitely be a positive for her. And of the two of them, of those two Aidan O'Brien horses anyway, she'd be the preference over Cherry Blossom. Then elsewhere, you've got Give Me the Beat Boys, who for the Jesse Harrington yard, again dropping down in trip, has shown good form over further the 6 furlongs in the Phoenix, and has run in the Middle Park as well. That was recently over 6 furlongs. It's never run over the 5 furlongs before. This horse is the one that cost an awful lot of money pre the Royal Ascot sale. He won twice earlier in the season, and then he cost a lot of money. He went to the Coventry. He ran a good 4th that day. But form might have just petered off a little bit, and the 5 furlongs is a question. A couple of horses that the 5 furlongs isn't a question for in here. Tiger Bell for Aidan McGuinness would be a 5 furlong specialist. That filly, she's 3 from 5, and her 3 wins have all come over the 5 furlongs. She won in France back in August. She's been off since. She's got a sort of speed on speed pedigree. And her group win was on soft ground, but she's won on good ground before, so I don't think that'll be a factor. Valiant Force is Aidan Murray's horse in there for Ammo Racing. Big horse for the Ammo team because he gave them their first Royal Ascot win in the 5 furlong Norfolk. Has disappointed on soft ground in France over 6 since, but back down to 5 would be a positive, and the fast ground will be a positive. I think they'll run, because isn't that a win and you're in horse? I think it is. And then Donica has Asheen, is it? I think it is. The filly in here who's recently changed hands, was owned by his mother, I think bred by her as well, and has recently changed hands into American ownership with the Commonwealth team. She got her act together over 5 furlongs on good ground, and then she became unstuck on soft ground at Newmarket in her most recent run. But the trip and ground will be a positive. And Donica's 2-year-olds this season have been something to note. 13 2-year-old winners in Ireland, 2 in the UK with Porta Fortuna. So she would be noteworthy specifically in those new colours. Then a bit of a mention to Starlust for Rafe Beckett, who the trip I think would be the question mark there. All three of his wins have come on the all-weather and over 6 furlongs. So turf and 5 would be a question mark.
Some of these are buried on the AEs. Obviously, as the week goes on, we'll have final past performances and know exactly who's running where, and we'll get a little bit more into specifics. But just in terms of, your general thought about the juvenile turf sprint and Europe's chance of winning it, they won it for the first time last year. Are you bullish on the foreign contingent? And is it Big Evs you'd be more focused on, or do you think you can cast a bit of a wider net?
Definitely Big Ev's the focus. I was blown away with what he did at Doncaster, but I'm not confident. I just never feel confident with that. I know we've obviously won sprint races over there, but I just never feel that confident about sprinters in America. And even though he's been a weapon this season, I think this could be a whole nother level.
We'll see how it plays out. We'll talk about it more as the week goes on. Let's go to the juvenile fillies turf. And let's start this conversation with Porta Fortuna for our friends at Medallion Racing and their partners. As mentioned, did very well in the Cheveley Park, going the 6 furlongs over pretty very good ground, really, and just looks like one to me, the kind of horse when you get the 6 furlongs on the straight in Europe. Usually the 2 turns of the mile and a 16th are within the grasp. How serious of a contender is Porta Fortuna to you?
Oh, she's been such a consistent horse this year and a really consistent and important horse for Donecker. Obviously a young trainer, and he's making a name for himself with his 2-year-olds. And this was his first Royal Ascot winner. And it could be his first Breeders' Cup winner, which obviously would be huge for a family, from a family who has huge history with the Breeders' Cup. So yeah, she's been a star for the yard. She's 4 from 6. That includes, as you say, that recent Group 1 Cheveley Park over 6 furlongs. She also won the Albany at Royal Ascot over the 6. This mile, will that suit is the question mark. She's run a solid effort over 7 in the past. That was in the Mawj. That was a decent effort from her. So that and the way in which she finishes over 6 suggests that you would hope that this trip will be fine for her. Good ground is definitely a positive. I think she should be able to, she's definitely not in any way a big filly. She's quite an athletic filly. I think that she'll be able to cope with the track absolutely fine. And this Breeders' Cup race was already discussed pre the Cheveley Park win. So this was very much on the agenda to step up to the mile at Santa Anita because of those American connections before she won at Newmarket. And then obviously that was a massive Group 1 bonus. And now they'll be putting her on the plane. And as long as she travels, like, she's just been so consistent. There's nothing about her, track or ground. Obviously that trip as discussed, but there's nothing about her that you could confidently write a line through her, I don't think. So she has to stay on the list, doesn't she?
And I like the idea that this is no kind of afterthought. Definitely a race that was in the back of the mind, at least from a long way out. Been a lot of money for Carla's Way since I saw the betting open. This one successful last time in the Win and You're in action in the Rockfell at Newmarket, and has a couple of really nice races going 7 and looks poised maybe to go a little bit farther for Simon Christopher. What do you make of Carla Way's chance in here?
Yeah, Simon and Ed Christopher, like I said at the top of the show, 2 bullets to fire, and this is one of them. 2 good chances. When she won the Rockfell, there was a couple of hard luck stories in behind, specifically with Oli Sangster's Shawari. But that was 7 furlongs on good to firm ground. She's going to step up and trip here, but obviously getting the 7, you'd hope that she'll get the 8 here. Absolutely fine. Very gettable there at Santa Anita. Good ground, also a positive for her. She's a very smooth mover. And the Chrisfords have always been, a trading operation who are very much open to big international campaigns. So again, the Rockfell was a good few weeks away by the time the Breeders' Cup comes around. And I think she will have been very much, as you say, it's not an afterthought with her. It'll be, I think, yes, she won a Win and You're in race, but she's had plenty of time to train for this. And they would be open to these sort of races with horses that can travel. So yeah, I was taken with her Rockfell win, despite the fact you can make excuses for some in behind. She got the job done on the day, and stepping up in trip won't be an issue for her.
How about one who's already proven going the mile and proven going left-handed? That's I'm not sure if they say content or content for this Aidan O'Brien filly by Galileo. Is she a serious contender?
Well, I personally don't think so. She's obviously very much a confirmed European miler, but is she going to appreciate the mile at Santa Anita is a different thing altogether. She won her latest Group 3 that was on soft ground at 20-1. It's not often you see an Aidan O'Brien horse like with, you know, a 2-year-old in a group race winning at 20-1, really. That was on, she won the, she's got form on good ground and soft ground, so she is ground versatile. But she's by Galileo, and she's out of a bit of a speedier type in Mecca's Angel. Aidan Aidan's got a crack 2-year-old team this year, and this is what he's landed on for this race. So that in itself makes her interesting, but she wouldn't be in the top start. She wouldn't be on the starting sheet, I don't think, back home. But it's just I find it very interesting that she's the one that Aidan's landed on for this race.
I'm curious to clap eyes on her out there. A lot of times in these 2-turn fast ground turf races, I tend to be biased towards the ones that we talked about earlier in the segment on the Juvenile Fillies turf, the speedy types stretching out, as opposed to one that seemed to need all of the mile to really show the best form. They can sometimes be a little too galloping to be suited by the USA configuration. Obviously, there is speed on the dam side, so I'm curious, but I think I share your skepticism, at least relative to the rest of the strong international contingent. One that doesn't fit neatly into the European shipper candidate because we're dealing with a private purchase, but I feel like I should ask you about Lalnay, now going out for Phil D'Amato. Has the kind of Group 2, Group 3 form in France that usually portends well for a horse shipping over for normal American stakes racing, even at the Grade 1 level. But I'm not sure how this form stacks up in terms of a Breeders' Cup. Am I perhaps underrating Lalnay in this spot?
Well, she was trained by Jan Barbaro, who's had a fantastic season over in France. As you say, now with now in America, but she won 3 on the bounce in France. That included a Group 3 on soft ground. She as well has never tried the mile, but that, shouldn't be too much of an issue. But she's never run on good ground. She's been running on the French softer ground, which, I don't know. I haven't seen enough of her to know if she would be a horse that we would be confident would take to Santa Anita. But the fact that she's not just shipping in, she's a long time stayer, is interesting, because they obviously think that there's races to be won with her in America. So on that basis, you'd have to trust that those around her think that she will be suited to American racing and Santa Anita in the short term. Definitely makes her interesting, but on all known base level form, she'd have to step up.
It was long rumored, more than rumored, even listed on the Breeders' Cup website, that Opera Singer was going to be making the trip over for this race. That did not happen, but Opera Singer's form lines are represented by Le Pavot for our friends at Glen Hill Farm and their partners. This is what I'm very curious to get your opinion on, because I was a bit taken by the run in the Boussac on Arc Weekend. How serious of a contender is Le Pavot?
Well, the thing is with the Boussac is it was hard to get away from Opera Singer, wasn't it? As in, she won so impressively. And I honestly, I think was it you I was talking to where we watched, I was saying that, the more you watch it back, the more you were just like wowed by Opera Singer in that French race. And the fact that she's not showing up here and that Content is the Aidan O'Brien representative, as already discussed, is a little bit disappointing, I guess. In terms of the form in behind, Graffin was saying to me when I saw him did I tell you this already? I saw him at the sales. No. And he was very disappointed with his runners as a whole over at Longchamp on Art Weekend. And I think Le Pavot was a horse who, in his head, he was, he definitely was disappointed with. But I was trying to say that he'd seemingly bumped into a bit of a monster in Opera Singer. But the fact that I was so disappointed, does that mean that there is more to come from her? That's what I was left wondering, I guess.
It's an interesting question, and never been left-handed, never been on this kind of ground. There's a lot of questions, but pedigree-wise, seems like one that my gut tells me could be suited. Another one we'll have to keep a very close eye out for when it comes to looking at these horses next weekend. And again, between the stuff we're doing for attheraces.com and stuff you can find on our, you'll find on our YouTube channel as well, we're going to have a lot more clues as we get closer. One more race on Friday we're going to talk about, and that's the juvenile turf. Who do you want to start the conversation with in here? Seems like another pretty deep contingent.
Yeah, this is very much Aidan O'Brien focused, really, isn't it? In the sense of River Tiber, unquestionable. Johannes Brahms has an entry as well, but he also has an entry on the dirt, actually. So River Tiber and Unquestionable are the Aidan O'Brien focus points, probably. River Tiber, we'd better start with him. I mean, he blew loads of people away in the early start of the season, real sort of precocious, early, impressive, eye-catching type. 3 wins on the bounce. Then he went to the Covent. He wrapped that up by winning the Coventry over the 6 furlongs. The Group 1 starts of late, they've been a little disappointing. He got a bit lit up in the Middle Park when he ran over the 6 furlongs when we last saw him. He's stepping up to the mile here, which I am intrigued about with him. If he's gonna, I think you just want to see him settle in his races a little bit more, maybe. I don't know. I feel like the latest run from him wasn't a true running for River Tiber, and I'm definitely not giving up on him yet. I think I still have in my head what he was doing in the midsummer. That hasn't left my mind yet, and just because we haven't quite seen that of him more recently, I think it's probably still in there. And then Aidan's got Unquestionable, who is a colt who's so likable. He's just got the 1 win to his name, but he's been so consistent, and he ties in with form from the best 2-year-olds around in Europe, the likes of Rosalian and Bucanero Fuerte as well. He comes here off the back of a solid run at Longchamp. That obviously was over the 7 furlongs, and he'd be stepping up to the mile. That won't be a problem for him. I think that'll just be fine for him, and the good ground will be a positive for Unquestionable as well. And in terms of consistency, he'll show up, I'd be confident he'll run his race.
Both of those Aidan O'Brien runners being by Wooten Bassett feels significant to me in terms of, maybe something strategic to send 2 such strong runners to the same race, maybe really looking to further bolster their stallion. What does that narrative make sense? What is sort of the scuttlebutt around Wooten Bassett's at the sales right now?
Yeah, I mean, they flew off the shelf at the European sales, the European yearling sales. He's just continuing on the rise, Wooten Bassett, as a stallion. And, he can inject a bit of speed as well as a bit of stamina. He's a real kind of all-round. His horses have plenty of options. They're not just pigeonholed as one thing or another. So he remains a very important to the Coolmore operation. And these 2-year-olds will be, these sort of horses, of course it's important, and of course they want to support their own stallions. And I don't know if there'll be, I wouldn't have put the 2 angles together. I'd say it's more coincidence that it's these 2 that just happen to be by Wooten Bassett, but that would just be that's just my opinion.
Interesting. Although, I mean, I do think from a business point of view, featuring such an exciting up-and-coming stallion in front of the U.S. breeding industry on this big stage, it's an interesting bloodstock storyline should they run well. And, on the known form, I feel like they could run 1-2. One quick question about River Tiber before we move on. Just curious, for the uninitiated who are watching, how good is Van Dijk, who beat River Tiber the last 2 times?
Oh, Van Dijk won the Middle Park. I adore this horse. That was the very good weekend for the Crisfords, because they won the Group 1 with Van Dijk and they won the race the day before with Carla's Way. So they had a cracking 2-year-old weekend in Newmarket. Van Dijk, he's just proved to be a bit of a revelation this year, and he's been a very hard nut for anyone to crack. He came from the Breeze Up sales, so he was like very precocious and professional from an early stage, which I think has helped him this year. I'll be intrigued to see if he develops on as a 3-year-old or whether other horses progress past him. But in the meantime, what he did in the middle part is so impressive. And that's why I'm sort of relatively forgiving of River Tiber that day.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about another Aidan O'Brien runner, Mountain Bear. Little sneak preview when we talk about the figure conversion stuff that we're going to have as part of our In the Money Plus package, inthemoneypodcast.com/plus, if folks want to check that out. But Mountain Bear's figure in the Star Appeal at Dundalk, very strong, very competitive. And even though the form obviously is behind that of the stablemates, this is the kind of form that we've seen win average runnings of the juvenile turf. This is probably an above average running of the juvenile turf, but I keep coming back to Mountain Bear as one with a possibility in this spot, based on the left-handed form and just the fact that we've seen form like this do well here. Am I nuts to think that Mountain Bear might be able to take out the more fancied stablemates in a spot like this?
He wouldn't have made my shortlist personally, but I'm definitely not going to tell anybody that they're nuts if they can pick an angle out with some of these Aidan O'Brien horses. Just in the sense of, like, as we've just said, we've just seen what he's done with horses that don't have an obvious profile for a Breeders' Cup race in the past, but he knows more than we do. And so the fact that if they're showing up in these races, that is of interest. He, again, has got form that ties in with the likes of the best 2-year-olds around over here in the UK anyway. Hartem and Iberian are 2 good 2-year-olds that he's finished behind before. But on all known form of what we've seen of him thus far, I think he'd have to step forward for me. I don't think he's in the same bracket as River Tiber or Unquestionable.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get what you're saying on form terms. I suppose it's just I feel like we've seen enough in the past of the other Euro type runners doing well that I'm not willing to completely give up. Let's complete the O'Brien team with a discussion of a horse who came up a little bit earlier in Johannes Brahms.
Yeah, again, so I'm right in saying that he has the 2 entries. He's also entered in the dirt, I think, which I think would be unlikely. He, again, was quite an early type. He won back in May, and then he's just had the 2 runs since. So he's been lightly raced compared to the likes of a Mountain Bear or even an Unquestionable. And he's been campaigned very much at that sprinting trip. The Doncaster run was a much better form figure from him. But like I say, for me, the top 2 for the Aidan O'Brien yards would be the River Tiber Unquestionable gang. Yep. I thought it was interesting that he had that. I don't know. Yeah, I wonder what the thinking was behind giving him the dirt entry as well. I don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting and something that maybe we can explore. But that is definitely the second preference, not the first. So I think we can assume that he's gonna turn up in this spot. We must talk about Legend of Time. You mentioned the Appleby contingent, not quite as deep and strong as in years past, but there was an interesting form boost for Legend of Time out of that Tattersall Stakes with some of the others that finished in close, going on to run well, and I think it was the Dewhurst. I know our man Michael Adolphson is quite keen on Legend of Time at the current prices anyway. I was still worried about the relative inexperience and the strength of those top 2 O'Briens, and then my wise guy O'Brien. But what do you think of Legend of Time? Is this a serious contender?
Well, it's serious because of who he's trained by. I think obviously extremely lightly raced, just a couple of starts, and the debut win was over a mile, and he couldn't back it up later in group company over the 7 furlongs at Newmarket. But that wasn't a bad effort. He is a See the Stars out of a Danehill Dancer mare who's produced more staying types herself and was more of a middle distance horse. So the mile being the starting point of his career suggests that much further in time will be suited, and teaming that up with the pedigree as well. So that just left me wondering, with the limited evidence we have of Legend of Time, is a mile at Santa Anita going to be to his liking at this point in his career, was the question.
Yes, it is a very much of an open one. And I wonder what the market's going to do. Michael seemed to think that there was a chance, because of the Appleby factor, that the market might come for a runner like Legend of Time. I'm thinking this is one that could sneak off at a big price when all the money starts pouring in on the O'Briens. Let's move to Saturday, Vanessa, and talk about the Filly and Mare Turf, a race that the market really has as a match between Inspiral and Warm Heart. Is that the way that you see it? And which one would you prefer?
Inspiral, I think. This is fascinating. Yeah, this is going to be really interesting. Very much British Champions Day's loss is going to end up being the Breeders' Cup gain, because Inspiral will run here and Mostahdaf will run in the turf. And both of them, for the Gosden Yard, were going to run on Champions Day and didn't because of the weather. So she missed Champions Day. She's obviously been campaigned as a miler. Instead, they're going to come here and up her in trip over the 10 furlongs. She's always been a miler. She's never tried this trip, and she's won 5 Group 1s at the mile. She needs the good ground. Gosden seems very confident that the trip round here won't be an issue, which I'm in Gosden, I trust. Yes. The angle with her is, for all, like, how can you say about a horse who's won 5 Group 1 races that she's unreliable? But in my head, I'm saying it, she can be a little unreliable. She disappointed in the Sussex Stakes. Yes, it was like a monsoon that day, so you can write a line through that. She disappointed in the QE2 in 2022. And then she disappointed in the Falmouth in 2022 as well on Newmarket's July course. Again, when you say disappointed, when I say disappointed, you'll look and people will be like, what is she on about? She only got touched off ahead. But she went off 1-7 against the very below par field that day. Yep. And she couldn't get it done for whatever reason. She's a horse who I think over time we've learnt with her, she can be sparkling. And then she can throw in the odd disappointment. That is a fair comment to say. Yep. The 10 furlongs is the most interesting element. But as I say, in Gosden, we trust. And in Gosden, we trust that when she lines up, she's going to be in her good form, not her slightly trickier form, I think it's fair to say.
And keep in mind, 10 furlongs, but they do start down the hill. And with the ground being as firm as it is, I really do not have any question about stamina for her. I do think you make an interesting point about, that's an interesting form study angle when you can go back and find horses that have been beaten at short prices. It is hard to want to plan your entire wagering day around them. But I think she's for me one of the top 10 stars running at the whole Breeders' Cup, and I do expect her to run well. And ultimately, it sounds like you do too. But I do think you're wise to put that note of caution out there. We always love animal and child interruptions on the show. Who do we have there?
This is Rufus. Say hello. There he is, the little lad. Little Jack Russell, yeah, the cutest little bean. He's cross because I'm prepping for the Breeders' Cup.
Of course, not as many walks when there's Breeders' Cup prep going on.
But we'll plow on.
Do you see Warm Heart as the main danger?
Do I see Warm Heart? Yeah. I mean, she's been a bit of a revelation this season for Aidan O'Brien. She's just improved throughout. She's kind of been quietly just the big improver of the season. She won the last 2 Group 1. She won the Win and You're In at the Yorkshire Oaks at York's meeting. She won the Vermeer in good fashion after a very tricky start. Stumbled coming out the stalls that day. Managed to get her act together and still win. That was both over the 1.5 miles. So she's dropping back down in trip. But the Breeders' Cup has kind of been voiced to them and very much on their agenda from kind of mid-season with this horse, which I thought, again, when they're flagging horses up from quite early on as Breeders' Cup horses, I like that. Yeah. She probably has shown her best over further, but there's no reason to think that 10 furlongs will be an issue. She probably just hasn't had the right opportunity. So, yeah, she's again, she's probably she is Warm Heart's main danger in terms of what we're bringing over from Europe anyway. And she's a very likable filly, essentially. That sort of steady level of improvement has just been a really likable angle for her. So I don't have a huge amount of negatives to say about her, to be honest with you. The step down and trip, but like I say, I'm picking holes, really. I don't think that'll be an issue.
I am team Inspiral, but I will say this: the presence of In Italian and the fast pace she's likely to set could be great news for Warm Heart, and could maybe, just in a scenario, test Inspiral stamina. This could end up, even though normally I feel like the 1.25 miles at Santa Anita plays like, closer to a mile than a 1.25 miles. With a fast pace, that could really bring Warm Heart's stamina into play and test Inspiral. And I think that's the scenario for Warm Heart to win. I think without In Italian in the race, I'd be concerned that this might be too sharp for Warm Heart. But I
That's
do think
interesting. I mean,
it'd be good for her.
You have a much better handle on Santa Anita as a track and who it's going to suit in terms of trip wise. So that is very interesting, the In Italian angle for sure.
Win Marilyn has this. Now this is a Japanese horse, but I still wanted to get a quick take from you on her as an invader. Has that one bit of form, the Hong Kong Vase, that stacks up right with the pretty close to the fastest races that any of these have run. Are you across these Japanese runners yet, or is that something you're going to do as time goes on?
I was literally going to say, I can categorically tell you that the Japanese Contingent is still on the to-do list. Gotcha. So you can just park that one for the time being.
We'll put that one. We'll come back. We'll come back to that.
And it's very much an important to-do list because, of course, whatever they run internationally it's worth taking note of, these Japanese horses. And with having Equinox at the top of the world horse rankings, and that sort of him being the real sort of showstopper from there, I find their runners very intriguing at the moment wherever they show up, as I'm sure everyone does.
You have to at this point. If you're not paying attention. I'll say that. Maybe we should move the conversation to Lumiere Rock then for Joseph O'Brien, a horse that went close in the Prix de l'Opera.
Yeah, she did. She's improved. I think she's Joseph's only runner, which I'm a little surprised about. I thought she looked a little bit limited at the start of the season, but the cheek pieces being applied have really not revitalized, but brought her form up a level since they put the cheek pieces on. She's had an excellent couple of runs of late. She won a Group 2, and then she ran that very solid effort at Longchamp. This trip will be her ideal. She has got a lot of form with cut in the ground. I did wonder about the fast ground working for her. I think that's probably a little question mark in my mind with her. But again, is it more circumstantial that, she's been running in Ireland when we've had plenty of rain? So, has she just not had the opportunity? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the Ribblesdale, that seems like an interesting form line to look at. But within 2.5 to Warm Heart on that sort of USA style ground there. I guess my biggest concern about her is the length of the campaign. It's not anything crazy, but compared to some of these, we know there's a bunch coming here like fresh / pointed to this race. Whereas Lumiere Rock feels like one who, would it surprise me if this 3-year-old has just had a long season and doesn't show her best under these unfamiliar conditions? No, it would not shock me.
No, I can understand that for sure. Going back to the cheap pieces point, I wouldn't necessarily have picked up on that as obviously. It's just that I worked with Kevin Blake, who obviously works with the Joseph Yard, and that was the sort of feedback from when she won with those cheap pieces on. Apparently the jockey just said that he felt that there was like a whole nother gear there since that bit of headgear had been put on. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, but definitely behind on figures and form, but as we've said, the other Euro angle has paid some dividends, and Joseph O'Brien certainly no stranger to giant international successes. What about Rafe Beckett's runner State Occasion in here? Another one coming out of the opera.
Yeah, a little rattle through the rest of them in here. Yeah, State Occasion, she would need to step forward basically on what she's done thus far. She's got a listed win to her name, but that form is definitely below what we're talking about, even in sort of Lumiere Rock's case, really. The recent Longchamp run was definitely quite promising. She ran on well that day, and the fast ground would be a positive for her at Santa Anita, but a step forward would be needed from State Occasion, and she's a 5-year-old, so you ask yourself, like, is there a step forward there? You know,
Yes, that is that
is there the required step forward there?
Shall we move ahead to the Breeders' Cup Mile?
Yeah, for sure.
So we've talked about horses pointed here versus horses for whom the Breeders' Cup is an afterthought. I wonder if Paddington isn't in the latter category. This was a horse midsummer. If you ask me which European runner I was most excited to see at the Breeders' Cup, I probably would have said Paddington, but it's hard to support after what we saw the last day at British Champions Day. And I'm still wondering if he's even definitely going to show up in this spot. What do you make of Paddington at this point?
Paddington. Look, he was like how could you not have sort of absolutely adored him at the start of this season? You know, when he goes on his winning run, he tops it off by winning a Sussex, an Eclipse, a 2,000 guineas, a St. James's Palace. It's just Group 1 after Group 1, week after week, you know, a heavy, hard campaign. And then, of course, he's been beaten the last couple of times. Now, that doesn't in itself, I'm not one of these people that a horse has to go unbeaten or anything like that. Of course, I know that it doesn't work like that. But it was a real disappointment at Ascot. Now, obviously, we had the ground to contend with that day. Maybe there were other excuses in there as well. I thought he looked well. I was there at Ascot. You know, he looked well in the paddock. Then he just got quite lit up in the race itself. That was focused on a little bit. But I was then under the impression that was it, that he was going to be shipped off to stud. That's what I thought was happening.
There were quotes to that effect. There were quotes to that effect.
And now there's been this back and forward about whether he's going. So I genuinely have no idea if Paddington is going or not. I don't have a firm answer on that.
We'll find out soon. We've got people on the ground. Let me see. I actually sent a text this morning, but no answer yet to see if he's physically there. But I mean, it sounds like you're with me at this point. Probably one to bet against if he does turn up.
I've been there. Yeah, I wouldn't be with him definitely in that. It's one of those things that it's not going to be a surprise because he showed himself to be so tough and consistent over the mile for earlier on in the season. But how. You know, it's hard to be confident about a horse whose last performance was as bad as his was.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then the narrative stuff too about, you know, again, the Breeders' Cup, there's a lot of terrific horses who've done the sort of Breeders' Cup afterthought who don't run anything like their form, and it doesn't damage them at all. It's just they view it what Americans would call a free roll. What do you guys call, what do you call it? A shot to nothing?
Shot to nothing, yeah.
There you go. So I think that might be what's going on here. The current favorite, we're not going to hold your feet to the fire on yet. That's Songline. Serious form over in Japan. Interestingly to me, most of the books have Master of the Seas actually shorter than Mawj of the Godolphin pair. I see it the exact opposite. I feel like from a condition point of view, Mawj off that local prep race just has to improve. Master of the Sea is a horse I'm still not convinced isn't just seen to better effect over more galloping configurations, like the run at Ascot, like even the more galloping run at Woodbine. I prefer Mawj of that Godolphin pair. How do you separate those two?
Yeah, probably quite an important race, isn't it, for Godolphin, actually, thinking about it, given that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, they haven't got the biggest and strongest team this year. Master of the Seas, yeah, tricky to train, isn't he? I think that's been well documented now from the Charlie Appleby's yard. He's tricky to get right. He was meant to run in this race back in Delmar, and he was a non-runner that day. He missed a lot of last year. Then they took him to Woodbine, and then I thought that would be it. And I actually asked around, and the general consensus was that then we'd see him at the Breeders' Cup and he'd go there relatively fit, but with the run under his belt. But then they ran him at Keeneland last time out, so that clearly wasn't the plan. He's got a record that's pretty good fresh, and now that box isn't ticked, if you see what I mean. It doesn't mean that he's not going to run his race, but I just not sure that he'd be the most straightforward to train, and thus meaning he's not the most straightforward to back because he's not ultra consistent, I think it's fair to say. Whereas you've got a horse like Mawj, who this year obviously had the Maidan campaign, then won the 1,000 guineas, has had the whole summer off. And then she went to Keeneland, she won, that was off a break. It was a good performance. I mean, not only from the horse, but the trainer as well, over the 9 furlongs, making all. Then there was a big question about whether she'd go for this or the fillies and mares, where obviously so it was either stepping up in trip or down in trip, but they've decided to go for the down in trip option, which I like. I'm with you. I think she's the biggest danger, probably from the front. Yeah, I can definitely see. I'm not going to put anyone off her, that's for sure.
And, again, for the uninitiated more than the hardcores, I mean, to have 1,000 guineas winner running at the Breeders' Cup, I mean, this is a very big deal.
Yeah. And she won that 1,000 guineas. And, I was really looking forward. She beat that day Tahira, who then I was looking forward to the rematch that obviously didn't happen, which was a bit of a shame, but they pulled clear of the rest of the field. And, she showed that day that, I don't know, that I think we might be underestimating her in a weird way, just because she hasn't got like the traditional European profile with that Maidan campaign. Is that fair?
I do think that's right. I think that's an excellent point, and definitely one that I'm very much looking forward to seeing and probably betting on when it comes to this Breeders' Cup Mile. We've got a couple more to talk about as well in the spot betting wise. Kalina seems to be going with a single-digit odds chance with Sauterne as a bit more of a long shot.
Yeah, Kalina was the one who won a controversial Prix de la Forêt. It went to the steward's room. That was when Kinross was in behind that day. That's over the 7 furlongs. Gets the mile and the good ground as a positive. That was the Longchamp meeting where the ground was kind of different to what was reported, and everyone was saying it was quite a bit faster. Has been caught wanting at the highest level before, and did wonder if those same rules may apply again here over the mile.
Yeah, it doesn't sound wrong. Weirdly, Sauterne I'm not seeing in the betting, but I see in the entries and has the form that ties in nicely with Kalina. I mean, has beaten her a couple of times. What do you make of her chance if she runs?
I don't think she is running, is she?
Okay, maybe that's it. I mean, not in the betting, but I see in the entries, but maybe just didn't make the trip over. So we don't need to spend any time on that one as we move on to the big one from the European perspective. The way I see it, the turf, where personally, I mean, we have some very solid horses in terms of up to the mark, and Warlike Goddess, who could certainly make the frame, but I also wouldn't be surprised if this is a European 1, 2, 3. Very pleased to see
a European benefit.
Yes, well, that's what this race has largely turned into, with the exception of, there are some exceptions of Bricks and Mortar a few years ago, and you can argue that Up to the Mark is the best American turf horse since Bricks and Mortar, but you can also argue, and it'd be hard to argue against, this contingent of Europeans is so much stronger than what Bricks and Mortar beat a few years ago. We got some really, maybe not everybody that was rumored and everybody that we wanted to see, but an incredibly strong team. And it's led by Auguste Rodin and Mostahdaf. How do you separate those two, for starters?
Well, very different horses and very different profiles. Obviously, one an older horse in Mostahdaf and has been quite the revelation this season. And like Inspiral, missed Champions Day due to the weather, comes here now looking for a third top-level performance, top-level win on the bounce off the back of winning the Jubbmont International and the Royal Ascot. Oh, my God. Prince of Wales's stakes. Goodness me, Vanessa, come on now. Yeah, I mean, look, those performances have been absolutely devastating, haven't they? Do you know, like the style in which he's done them, both in different styles? That's the thing with this horse, is he's trip, track, ground, continent, jockey, condition, versatile. Like,
Yep.
he's done it under loads of different situations, and he's
Love
kept.
the left-handed form. Love the firm form. Those are the ones.
Yeah.
Those are the Europeans historically. That is a bigger question mark, I think, that a lot of people give it credit for. You can try to train them around a bend, but to be able to race around a bend and show that kind of, versatility, I love it.
Yeah, no, I can see there's very few holes to pick in Mostahdaf. I think, for me, Auguste Rodin is almost the more intriguing runner for me, whereas Mostahdaf is almost the safer bet for me, basically. I've just, like, how could you not have been impressed with him this year? And obviously, even earlier in the year, he chased home Equinox in the Shima Classic at Maidan. That was over the mile 4 that day. And then, so he's taking on some 3-year-olds in what looks like King of Steel. Apparently, he boarded a flight today to America, which is very exciting.
Current rumors have him going here, not the Classic where he's crossing.
Yeah, I think so. I think my guess would be with King of Steel, after he won this incredible Champion Stakes at Ascot on Champions Day with Frankie. My guess would be, and this is very much just a guess, but that the trainer would have been happy to have missed the Breeders' Cup altogether. Like, it's a quick turnaround for a big horse who's put in a career best effort on heavy ground at the end of what has been a relatively long season. And he's a horse for next year. It's not like they're retiring him. He's going to stay in training as a 4-year-old. So my gut instinct with King of Steel would be that the Breeders' Cup would be very important to the owner in Ammo Racing. And that they're very competitive and sporting people who would want to run. Whereas Varian I feel like he's a bit more of a reserved character. I wonder if he could have swerved it. But as a result, he's on the flight. He's obviously come out of the race well. And I'm absolutely fascinated to see him out there training next week. It'd be a remarkable end to his year if he could finish with the Champion Stakes and a Breeders' Cup turf. I think there's a question mark about Santa Anita, the track with him. Tight turns. Is that what he wants? Don't know. That would be maybe a bit of a question mark, but he won on the inside track at Ascot when we last saw him. Then Auguste Rodin has had this slightly strange year, was such a talking horse coming into the year, and he's managed to win an Irish Champion Stakes and an Irish Derby and an English Derby. He won the Futurity as a 2-year-old. So all those are top flight wins for this horse. He's a very different type of horse to King of Steel, but of course he beat King of Steel at Epsom, but they have, you'd be inclined to think King of Steel has progressed on from then. And of course he beat him in the Irish Champion Stakes as well. So he's confirmed that form with him a couple of times, but he's more likely, I think, to appreciate Santa Anita than King of Steel. So I've linked back round how you introed this, that Auguste Rodin and Mostahdaf are the most interesting European horses here.
This horse, I get like all the feels just looking at the Auguste Rodin PP cut, because here you have, and also how cool is it that we have all these classic winners, all these, great year for 3-year-olds stepping up at the Breeders' Cup, between having all 3 of the USA ones, having Mawj, having Auguste Rodin. It's just so cool to have this, that it excites me. And then of course you want to talk about bloodstock angles. The sort of Coolmore Dream Deep Impact Galileo cross that Auguste Rodin represents. How important is that going to be? How important is that those intersecting Japanese and Irish bloodlines? There's so much going on with this horse. I love the Irish champion win for this, that left-handed good ground win at Leopardstown. I really don't have any questions. I think he's just an incredibly sexy and fun contender. And I really have a lot of trouble separating these two at the top of the market. For me, I can't, we're going to wait. We're going to look at them in person next week and maybe so, but there might be a lot of, exotic USA bets where I just say one of these two has to win. And I leave it there. And in doing that, I'm absolutely running the risk of leaving myself exposed to a Nesto who in a normal year without this, you talked about the European contingent overall, maybe not being as strong as some years, but I think the exception to that is this turf because it's loaded. And in a normal year, this Nesto form would look pretty darn strong in here. But I don't know. I'm having trouble thinking a Nesto is going to be able to compete with Auguste Rodin and Mostahdaf. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Obviously, we haven't beat him in the Irish Champion Stakes, but then I think he did progress on from that to run that improved race behind Ace Impact in the Arc de Triomphe when we last saw him. That was a bit more of a bounce back to kind of the form Ernesto was showing as a 3-year-old up until the Arc run anyway. I think his 4-year-old campaign may have been deemed as a little bit disappointing because it hadn't really progressed on from what he'd done at 3. I did wonder about the ground with him as well. All form has been on kind of typically French ground, although the good run on Arc Day would have been on quicker ground, despite what it says in the book, as I keep reiterating. That was faster ground. So actually maybe wipe out the Ernesto ground fear, but I just would worry that he probably isn't of the level of a fit and firing Auguste Rodin, a fit and firing Mostahdaf, and now a fit and firing King of Steel.
The Auguste Rodin question I have to ask you, and this piggybacks off conversations we had about him earlier in the season. And we talked earlier about, Inspiral and horses that sometimes you worry about trusting too much horses who can get beat at short prices. He has a couple of blots on the copybook in the form of, and they were both runs that involved shipping. Do you have any concern at this point about Auguste Rodin's ability to ship?
It's been a concern. Yeah. I mean, we've spoken about it plenty. He shipped over for the Guineas and he flopped in the 2000 Guineas. And then he shipped over for the King George and he flopped massively in the King George at Ascot. But then, of course, he's won an Epsom Derby. He's won a Vertem Futurity as well. Obviously, that has also involved shipping. Now, there is some discussions about how and which ways he's traveled to the UK and what's worked for him and what hasn't. I don't know the details, but all I know is that to get to America, he has to go on a flight. Obviously, he could have traveled by boat and horse box. I don't know. Like I say, I don't know what the details are about those UK runs and what's worked for him and what hasn't. But all we do know is that if flying is an issue, well, flying can't be an issue because otherwise they wouldn't be risking it.
Wouldn't be
he's
right.
Too much of a value. Why would they? If they thought in any way that flying this horse to America wasn't going to be an issue, we wouldn't be talking about him in this race because they wouldn't take him. He's too important to them, as you've mentioned, because of the stallion, because of the breeding. They just wouldn't be doing that. So they obviously don't think that the flying is an issue, but it will be in the back of punters' minds that he has disappointed at short prices when he has shipped.
One of the things we're going to be doing, one of your assignments and my assignments next week is to spend as much time looking at this horse as possible and try to get any sense of how the journey has affected him. If you want to defend him, which I do, you could also say, I mean, certainly the Guineas, I'm 100% okay putting that down to the ground and how boggy it was. I remember we watched that race together, Kentucky Derby morning. And then what was the story with the ground for the King George? Was that like super duper soft or unusual ground, or was that ground he pretty much should have handled?
I think that's ground he should have handled. I don't think it was like an extreme ground situation. What was weird about that King George run is he was quite worked up beforehand. I felt like he got quite buzzy beforehand. Now they were kind of like, oh no, there was no excuses beforehand. There was no signs, but I did notice him in the paddock being quite buzzy. I wonder if he just got his, they're horses. Yeah. I wonder if he just got a bit worked up about something.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that kind of firsthand knowledge that you bring. One of the reasons it's so great to have you on these shows. I made the case. I tried to make a case for Broome last year. I don't think you can make a case for Broome.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got Bolshoi Ballet in there, Pisbadil and Broome. All, Pisbadil's Donica's horse, but the other two are Aidan's. Both Bolshoi Ballet and Broome are sort of well-travelled international type horses. But I don't think they're the focus points here, basically, to rattle through that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we do only have one other, it should, well, really quick, should King of Steel reverse form and or reverse course and end up in the Classic, do you give any count there?
I would be confused if that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be confident, and I'd be confused if that happened.
The Japanese Raiders seem like the ones to focus on of the shippers there, but we still, because of this weird TV schedule thing, have the turf sprint to talk about, and we are running out of time. So on this one, I might just let you rattle through. But I guess Bradsell's the one I want to make sure that we talk about.
Yeah, well, there's Bradsell and Living the Dream would be the big European sort of focus points here, I guess, or UK focus points anyway. Archie Watson trains Bradsell, has had a bit of a hit and miss season. Luke Morris will be in the saddle. Luke taking over from Holly because Holly Doyle is banned, which is very disappointing because she has a very good relationship with this horse, Bradsell, who's basically got the ability, isn't necessarily the most absolutely straightforward of rides. He won the King's Stand over the 5 furlongs at Royal Ascot. He was beaten in the Nunthorpe. He was sort of not placed in an ideal part of the track that day. And that Nunthorpe was won by Living the Dream, who's going to be Adam West's first Breeders' Cup runner. And Adam West, very small trainer from England. This will be huge for him. Lots of people wanting this horse to back the Nunthorpe win up. Off the back of that, he's been over in America. He's raced already in Keeneland. He didn't win, but I thought he ran a very solid prep race. Didn't think he was by any means disgraced. He breaks well. He goes from the front. He's been in America a while. Fast ground is a positive. There's lots of things to like, but he's in there because he won the Nunthorpe, which is a win and you're in race. And on all known previous form, that was a little bit of an out the blue performance. So it's hard to 100% believe that that's the horse he is all of a sudden, I think.
28-1 in the Nunthorpe, but I think you're right about the prep race at Keeneland being very useful. We are going half a furlong shorter here, and maybe they learned something in terms of, okay, we do have the gate speed to clear, but obviously, sub 21 first quarter that day in terms of the sectionals. That was just too fast. I wouldn't count out Living in the Dream at all in this spot. Another I'd put as one of my stars of the Breeders' Cup along with Bradsell in this spot. I think the Europeans have a shot. It's going to be tough to tackle the likes of Motorious with the local form. And then you have wonderful horses like Big Invasion and Caravel in here who are favorites on the broadcast. But it's a heck of a race. What of the other Europeans? At least a quick word on them before we wrap this up.
I think there's also Aesop's Fables in there for Aidan O'Brien, who's been very much campaigned as a sprinter this year, an out-and-out sprinter, and ran a good race in the Abbey behind Highfield Princess. That was where he wore the blinkers for the first time, and that seemed to step his form forward. So that's interesting. Presume that if they run him here, they'll keep the blinkers on him. It was quite a messy race in France in the Abbey, in behind the winner. And it was like slightly hard to unpack that race. Just there was a few horses in there who were relatively unlucky. He hasn't probably had his preferred good ground of late until that Nunthorpe run where he definitely ran a better race. Sorry, the Abbey run where he ran a better race on better ground. But then you go back to the Nunthorpe and he was beaten by Living the Dream that day. And he was a big price and ran, I think, last. I think he literally ran dead last. He's been better since, but is he good enough? I don't know.
Not out of it. On form figures, not out of it. With in these kind of chaotic races with the right kind of trip. Not one I'd be keen, but not one I'd be overly keen on. Certainly not one I'd be laying either at the kind of price that Aesop's Fable is going to be in that spot. If I asked you to, and we'll get into more of this type of thing as we get closer, but if I asked you to pick one European you were most confident about running their race / winning on the whole 2 days of the Breeders' Cup, does one leap to mind?
That I'd be confident about running their race or winning. I'm really excited about the 2-year-olds. Like, as we've discussed them, I think there's loads of interesting angles in there. But in terms of confident that they're going to run their race and put up a decent showing, I think that crown would probably have to go to Mostahdaf.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah,
Like,
I get it. Yeah.
in terms of a horse that I'd be, if Mostahdaf doesn't run his race at the Breeders' Cup, without a legitimate excuse of something going wrong or whatever, that would be one of the biggest surprises to me.
Great stuff, Vanessa. We got much more coming from you. Enjoy your trip over. Appreciate your time today. And we will be talking soon.
Goodbye, Peter. Can't wait.